Good. Since it's now 11 o'clock precisely, and many thanks to you for moving through quickly from coffee, we'll start the meeting. A warm welcome to those quite large numbers, very satisfactory attendance present in the room here today, and a warm welcome also to the people attending online, either live or on the recording. This dual format of the General Council meeting. This is the second time we've done it, and it's working increasingly well. Last time, there were 22 or something people in the floor present, and 28 online live, which is roughly the same as what we used to get in the olden days before we did it online. But there were also 82 people watched it afterwards online. So we're getting a much greater effect on or participation by members of the General Council than we used to get in the far-off days before 2021. So many thanks to you for attending, and I hope you find the meeting interesting. I would encourage participation, subject, of course, to finishing on time at 12:30, when, for those that are present at least, the technology doesn't allow us to offer this to people online yet. There's a cup of coffee available, another cup of coffee available. Can I also particularly welcome Carl Ledeker, who's the Senior Vice Principal and who is giving the kind of, I suppose, keynote address this morning. Tracy Slavin, who's the Secretary and Chief Operating Officer of the university, and Graham Payton, who is the Head of School of Biological Sciences, who's going to talk to us about the Science Teaching Hub. A warm welcome to the three of you, and thank you for coming along on a Saturday morning, which may be convenient to those of us who are retired, but is another day in the week for those of you that aren't. So many thanks to you for coming along. Housekeeping notes. I have to read out these housekeeping notes. Remember that we are being recorded, and Elise and Nicole, who are sitting in the shadows, are monitoring the online element of the meeting and are here to sort out any questions or difficulties that you have about the housekeeping during the meeting. Now, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at various points in the meeting, and I would encourage you to take advantage of these opportunities. Briefly, if you would, please. We're not after huge, long questions. It's more interesting to be brief and allow people to respond. If you could catch my eye if you want to ask a question, and remember to switch on the microphone, the button that says speak in front of you, to participate. For people that are online, you can use the chat function in Microsoft Teams, which will link you up to Elise and Nicole. If you want to ask a question, they can then read it out on your behalf, or if you want to be live, and that would be great, please click the raise hand icon, and they will beam you in to hear. That worked well last time. We have one person here who asked a question online at the last meeting, and it seemed to me to go fine. Mark, is that fair? Did it go fine from your point of view?
Really good.
Okay.
Very welcome to be able to participate that way, and I hope people can today too.
Good. Yes, thank you. The recording is being made. If anyone online is having trouble with connections or accessing the meeting, please rest assured you will be able to watch the recording at your leisure. I had thought that housekeeping notes would tell you where the toilets were and what happens in a fire alarm, but I'm grateful that they don't. Can we turn now to the meeting of the minutes of the 316th meeting of the General Council? We are not a novel body, which were held on 11th of June. And perhaps I could just whip through them and people could raise their hands if they feel that there is an inaccuracy. We'll come on to matters arising if you have any in a moment. Page 1, which contains the subheadings 1 to 4. Page 2, which is entirely taken up with what the principal was saying. Page 3, which starts with item 5. Page 6, which starts with item 7. And the final page, which has the notice of the 317th statutory meeting. May I take it then that these minutes are approved? Okay, thank you very much. Any items that folk want to raise that won't come up later in the meeting? Okay. Now, I said that Carol was the keynote speaker. We particularly asked Carol to come along because we felt the business committee, which acts for the General Council in between meetings, we felt that the importance to the university of its position in the league tables, the very many league tables that are around measuring university performance, was a particularly important subject. And Carol is the guru or at least I see Carol as the guru. Perhaps he would disclaim that title in the university on the subject. And so, although he's going to cover the happenings in the university more generally, he will do so with special reference to the league tables. The floor is yours, Carol.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning. If the video on YouTube is to go viral, it's probably not because of me, but probably more because of Graham, because as you will see, his production values of slides are much higher than mine.
And his tie is even more bright.
It's a great pleasure to be here. My name's Carl Leidecker, and I'm the Senior Vice Principal, and you are right that my specialist subject, perhaps, is University League tables. But of course, I have a broad role in the university, and I thought just to start things off, I would talk a little bit about what we as a senior team and as a university community are focusing on at the moment. And then I'd like to say a couple of things either side of the bit that I'm going to talk about in relation to the league table, in relation to my own portfolio, and I cover the people side of things at the university. So I wanted to say a few things about some important developments that we have in relation to people, and then also a really important topic, which is environmental sustainability, because I chair our Sustainable Development Committee, and I am the lead for sustainability at the university. And as you will see, I've also created a bridge between the league table discussions and sustainability. So just in terms of the overall things that we're looking at the moment, it's fair to say that financial sustainability is at the forefront of university thinking across the higher education sector, and you'll be aware of that from the newspapers and the media at the moment. And so we need to grow our income, and we focus a great deal on that, of course. You'll also be aware that we have some major capital projects underway, and we're expecting the tenders to return shortly, having tendered for 2 projects. One is the King's project to create a new space at the heart of the campus with some really, really good teaching facilities, and also to repurpose the Johnston site as our business school for the future. And that, again, is part of our strategy for income growth and for our student experience. We now have a new Director of Estates who started in December, Morag Beers, and with her we're going to now be starting a really major look across the campuses here in Aberdeen as to their future. The world is changing rapidly, the way we teach has changed fundamentally in the last few years and will change further. The way we research is changing with our focus on interdisciplinarity, for example, and the way people just generally want to work and the balance of their time working at home, off campus, and working at the university. And all of those things coming together means that we really need a really big conversation that I hope you will get involved in as well about the future of our estate. We need, I'm sure the principal talked about this when he was here, we need to build our research capacity further, and there's a lot of work going on in that space. And we also have a new vice principal for regional engagement, my colleague Pete Edwards, and we have a big push to be much more globally and regionally engaged externally, to work more with industry, to ensure that our university is not an ivory tower, but is really having impact, which is important because we want to have a real role in the world, but it's also really important for our research and our evaluation of that, where we want to improve our impact in the world. And finally, the number one commitment in Aberdeen 2040 is around our people. It's about well-being, health and safety of our diverse community, and that's really important to me. It stood us in good stead through the pandemic, and that's why I also wanted to say just a few words about some people things that are happening. There are three important things that I wanted to talk about. The first is our home working policy. When I talk to people around the sector and I talk to our trade unions, they say that our development of this policy through the pandemic was actually sector leading, that it has allowed our staff to be able to find a way of working that has helped them both navigate the pandemic, but also to transform the way they want to work into the future. And we've now passed a milestone where over 1,000 of our staff have a formal home working agreement. And that allows them to negotiate with the university how and where they want to work, which also allows us as a community to ensure that when they're not here, it's not putting a burden on other people. And so that works really well, and we're really proud of the way that's working. But it does mean that sometimes there are, particularly on a Friday, you might find around campus quite a few offices empty. And so that's why we need to think about the future use of our estate. I've been leading a piece of work that's taken over a year, probably a year and a half, around a new academic promotion system. And what we've done there is try to define the kinds of things that make a key contribution to Aberdeen 2040, and that we then recognise and reward our academic staff for those things. And so it's absolutely a completely new system, which has both a clinical pillar that we've never had before, which will benefit those who spend quite a lot of time doing clinical activity and felt that that was not valued. And we also have a new pillar which speaks to that regional and international engagement with industry, which covers enterprise, innovation, and impact, which is not something that we have been able to reward our academic community for in the past. So really excited about that. We've just launched it, and I've got the first briefing session on Monday morning to socialize this with our community, and we'll get the first applications in May this year. And finally, we've just had a staff survey again. We do it every 2 years now, and I'm pleased to say that those results show that our staff generally find working at the university a very positive experience. There's lots in there for us to reflect on as a community, but I'm very pleased with the results that we received in the latest staff survey. So, now my special subject that you particularly asked me to talk about, and that's league tables. I just want very, very quickly to say that we need to recognize that league tables are flawed. There are all kinds of reasons why one shouldn't be a slave to league tables. There are methodological problems with them. I always say that at the beginning, it's really important to understand that. But I also say that they are very, very important. And if you ignore the league tables, it's a surefire recipe for going down in the league tables. So it's really vital that we pay attention to what they say, because they are a key driver of our external reputation. They help us to attract students, they help us to attract staff. So it's really important we focus on them. And what we do is we look at 5 key league tables, 3 in the UK that are listed at the bottom there, and 2 world league tables. And what I've put on this slide is our average over last 5 years. If you take the results, our UK ranking in each of those 5 tables, this is what you get. So we've risen from averaging 31st to averaging 24th. And you think, oh, well, what does that tell us? Not very much. It's not a massive shift. So what I then did was, let's look over a much longer time frame, going back over 10 years. And what you see here is that for 10 years, we ranked across the average of these tables in the mid-30s. But in the last few years, we've seen momentum in terms of improved league table rankings, which have led us now to be on average in the low 20s, now reached 24th. And you'll have the slides obviously afterwards as well, but you can see the results of each of these league tables over the last 5 years and the way in which that pans out. And you can see in particular that the Guardian League table, the one on the left, which we were at 51st 5 years ago, we are now ranked 13th. And that is all based on education alone. There is no research measurement in the Guardian. And that's testimony to the unbelievably positive student experience at this university. In the last 2 years, we have been ranked 5th and then 4th in the National Student Survey, having been ranked very, very low in that in previous years. And we've built that up through the fantastic work that the whole community has done through the pandemic. So that has underpinned some of the rise in the Guardian League table. There are many, many measures that go into league tables. Some of them, you think, well, that doesn't tell me very much. We shouldn't really be chasing that measure as an important one. But the reason why league tables are important is that many of the measures really do matter. So things like student satisfaction, student employability, really important that our students feel that they will get a good career at the end of their studies. And this is one that we also want to focus on. The principal and I have focused on this one. This is our student-staff ratio. There is probably nobody who doesn't care about student-staff ratios. Our students care about it because it means that there are more teachers per student if you improve your student-staff ratio. And our staff care about it because it means there are more staff to carry the increased student numbers that we are trying to generate. And what we see over the past 5 years, we've had a strategy of investing in academic staff as well as professional services staff, which is what Tracy leads, because we've got that side as well to support the student and staff work. But we were ranking 75th in the UK for our student-staff ratio. We just did not have enough academic staff for the number of students that we have. And we have now moved that much more up to the bottom of the second quartile, up to 39th in the UK. So we're starting to get to the sorts of levels of staffing that you would expect in the Russell Group or the best of the research-intensive universities that are outside the Russell Group. So that's just one measure that I thought I would pick out from all of the league table stuff. I won't dwell on this, but this just shows how we look at each of the UK league tables and plot our progress on this. And but the reason I put this slide in is that the one in the middle is the complete university guide. And suddenly we dropped from 26th to 38th 2 years ago. Did we get worse? No. What happened? A methodological change. Previously, their methodology had been almost exactly the same as the Times and the Sunday Times. But they changed the methodology and we dropped 12 places. So what I'm trying to say is that individual league table performance in one league table over 1 or 2 years tells you very little, because there are huge amounts of complexity behind the scenes of the data, aggregation sometimes over 2 years, data missing from some universities and so forth. So you cannot overinterpret one league table in a short period of time, which is why we look to aggregate across, as I did at the beginning. You will also see that it's been more difficult for us to hold our position in world rankings than it is in the UK rankings. So this one, you can see on the left, that's the Times Higher World University Rankings. We've been at 158th 4 years ago, and this year we're down to 192nd. It fluctuates quite significantly year on year. And what we see on the right with the QS is that actually we've gone from 172nd down to 220th. And you might think, Carl, what are you doing? You know, the university is going down out of the top 200, and that is a problem for us. But if you look at what's happening in our UK ranking in these tables, there is almost no change at all. So the one at the bottom here is the QS World Ranking. We've actually risen in the last year from 28th to 27th, but we've been roughly at, you know, mid-20s across entirely the last 5 years. So what that shows me is that our world ranking is not completely within our control because of the amount that other university systems in Australia, in North America, in China, and so on, are investing in their university systems, for example, in research, in industry income, and so forth. So we have to look both at our world ranking, but also at our ranking in the UK, and that's a much more positive story. Rankings are changing. We now have new rankings that I didn't put in the average over the last 5 years, but I just wanted to talk very briefly about these. These rankings are about environmental and sustainability and impact in relation to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The first of these to launch was a kind of new ranking by the Times Higher World Ranking Organization, and this is the Times Higher Impact Ranking. And what you can see here is that we were 31st in the world in the first edition of that, out of 462 universities. This is a ranking to which you must submit data. So in the first year, we were one of the first to submit, and we were ranked highly. Now, you might track our ranking over the next 5 years and think, Carl, again, what are you doing? We're going down in that ranking. We're now in the 100 to 200, where they don't differentiate. They don't actually give you your exact ranking. But that's because the ranking is now 3 times the number of submissions, because universities across the world see the value of their positioning in relation to impact, in relation to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so we are now ranked between 100 and 200 in this ranking, and we're looking forward to the next iteration. We'll see how we do in that. There is another new ranking, the QS, which is the other of the world rankings, thought, well, Times Higher have now got an impact ranking linked to sustainability. We must have one as well. So they produced one themselves as well. Fortunately, we don't have to do anything for this one. We don't submit any data. They use publicly available data. And we were delighted when this was published because they published it for the first time last year, and we came out 64th in the world in their sustainability ranking. And actually, they ranked us 13th in the world for sustainable education. And that speaks to some of the things that we have, some of the subject areas and the strength of our education in things like Graham's own school, in biological sciences, and other parts of the university, such as geosciences. So this is growing more and more important, and will gather in importance over the following years. So I thought I would just finish off by saying a few things about what we're doing about sustainability at the university. We have, I guess, 2 dimensions here. One is how we as a university operate, how sustainable are our buildings, our heat sources, our waste management, all of those sorts of things, the biodiversity of our campuses. But also, what impact are we having through our research and our education in relation to sustainability? And that's the part that those rankings are looking at as well. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals was not something we talked about much at the university before we launched Aberdeen 2040 in 2020. When we did that piece of work, asking our community what was important to them, this came up very, very strongly, and we decided that we would, in future, under Aberdeen 2040, put the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals at the heart of what we do. So, for example, now, every time someone applies for a research grant, we tag it against which of the Sustainable Development Goals it is operating against. Which one of those will it have an impact on? And the same with all of our publications in Pure. And that allows us then to understand how well we're doing, which of the areas we're focusing on, and how effective we are in making a difference to things that matter to our global society. And we are also now beginning to map what our curriculum looks like so that we can fulfill our commitment that our students and staff will be leaders in the protection of the environment that we committed to under Aberdeen 2040. We have some dedicated programs, such as the MSc in Sustainability Transitions, but that's only one of a large number of programs that now address the climate emergency, the energy transition, and so forth. And we produce now annually a Sustainable Development Goals report, which you can find on the university website, and you'll find in there a whole host of really, really exciting stories that we as a university are very proud of, and we want to showcase to the world and the wider community here at the university as well. We have invested since Aberdeen 2040, since we launched it. Tracy and I have worked together to build a team based in the States, but will work across the entire university to help to move forward our own operations in relation to sustainability. It's not something I think we were strongly focused on prior to 2020. We did not have many people, but we now have built a team, and they're really starting to get some traction in what we do. We do our building projects differently. We look at our waste management differently. And I think we're going to see some real developments in this space because we've committed to net zero before 2040. That's a huge challenge. But this last year, we launched, we did a piece of work in the Sustainable Development Committee. We launched our sustainable travel policy. Each of us now looks and thinks before we travel, do I need to fly? We've made it easier for our staff to understand the impacts of flying versus the impacts of taking the train. So, for example, I have not flown to London over the last 3 or 4 years. I try not ever to fly domestically. Now, sometimes one has to, and that's allowed in the policy, but we all try to think, what can our contribution be to trying to cut our carbon emissions? Because the travel of the university is a big, big proportion of what our scope emissions are. So, lots of things going on, and we'll be launching our first climate assembly very shortly. It was meant to be this week, but we had to postpone it for some reasons this week. But in the next month, we're holding our first climate assembly to draw any member of staff and any student from the university together, where they will come together and debate an important topic that we want to take forward. And our first climate assembly is going to be on the biodiversity on campus. I'll stop there. There's some further sources of information about all of these matters. First of all, about the university, about league tables that if you've got a university login, you can go and access, and also freely available information about what we're doing in relation to sustainability. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Carl. That fulfilled the spec beautifully. Thank you. Questions for Carl, if any? The gentleman there, Brian, is it?
Reverend Dr. Brian Sherritt. My question relates to something I discovered only before COVID, that this university has a campus out at Wuhan. And the first person I know of that caught COVID in Aberdeen was through getting it from a neighbour who was out in Wuhan recruiting students for that campus. And since then, I've been saying to myself, why do we have a campus in Wuhan? And I don't mean just Wuhan, anywhere in China, a country that doesn't respect human rights, that imprisons students in Hong Kong and elsewhere who protest and they don't have the freedom of speech we have. And I'm not the only one. I was talking to friends in Oxford recently, and they said a number of other graduates of other universities with links with China are saying, why is this immoral link with China still being maintained?
don't actually have a campus in China. We do not have a campus there. We do have a joint educational institute with South China Normal University. Those are programs particularly in computing science and so on with South China Normal University, and we work in partnership with them, as do many, many universities in the UK, but we do not have a campus in China. I think you're speaking there to a broader point about the relationships between UK universities and Chinese universities. And the government, clearly the UK government, has taken steps and introduced an act in 2021 which requires all universities to evaluate their overseas partnerships to ensure that they do not endanger national security. And we take our responsibilities in that regard very seriously and have a series, we have a group that looks to ensure that our relationships with China and other states around the world are appropriate and are not endangering national security.
It's not just national security, it's a question of freedom of speech. Are you encouraging freedom of speech in China?
We recruit students from around the world, of course we do, from many different regimes. I think we also trade with China as a nation, as does every country in the world. So I think we cannot stand aside from that, but what we need to do is ensure that we always act in accordance with our own values as set out in Aberdeen 2040, and I believe that that is what we do.
Another question? Yes, remember to switch on your mic.
Is that it? Can I just congratulate you on using the train more and the airplane less? I think this is an important aspect of our responsibility to the environment. Also, I really like travelling in trains.
Yes, the lady there, whose name I should be able to remember but can't.
Lynn Macmillan.
Of course.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, and it was fascinating to see how Aberdeen is improving in the rankings. My question relates to the care for the state of the university. I took the number 20 bus up here today from the town centre, which comes along West North Street and goes along the back of Marshall College. And I was very dismayed to see the state of the buildings at the back of Marshall College, which I understand are still in the care of the university. Huge contrast to the front of Marshall College, which of course is in the care of the City Council. Weeds growing out of the back of the building, looking, pretty derelict actually, and I wondered what the university was planning to do about that. Thank you.
Yes, we've done a condition survey of the building as a first step to understanding the state of the building. We have also been doing a piece of work to understand what the potential future uses of Marshall College might be. That was led by the previous Director of Development, and we have considered that report. It's fair to say that it's been difficult to find an economically viable use for the back half of Marshall College, and those discussions are ongoing with the City Council, who, as you may be aware, are looking to redevelop that whole area. For example, they've removed a shop, and there are plans for the police station opposite, and so on. So we are working very closely with with the City Council in order to try to find an appropriate solution for the future use of Marshall College. At the same time, we also have major collections in there, and we do need to do some work in Marshall College to ensure that it is safe. Obviously, there are risks around fire from a building of that scale and age, and also water tightness and so forth. So it is something that we consider actively at the Estates Committee regularly as to what the future use is, but we're also taking steps now to ensure that we secure the fabric of the building, because that's obviously our responsibility as well. Unfortunately, there are no easy solutions, and I know that I think the business committee is also, I think we may even have been involved in a discussion around this. It's simply not been easy to find a viable solution for it, but we continue to explore that with the council, because we think working with other agencies probably offers the best opportunity for it to be, for there to be a long-term solution.
Jenny.
Could I just add to that and ask, is there a timeline? Because buildings will not stay in the same state that they are now, and so we're all very aware of the future of those buildings. So do you have a sort of timeline, or are you looking at these issues on a regular basis, perhaps?
Yes, my colleague Pete Edwards is in discussions at the moment with the City Council and others about Marshall College. Those are active discussions, but I'm not, I don't think it's appropriate for me to speculate what might be being explored there, but we do hope that we can find a common solution that will work for the city and the university. As I say, we've had a number of different looks at this since I arrived. It's an ongoing issue that we know that many of our students, former staff, former students care deeply about the place. It's where they spend, they have a strong emotional attachment to it. But there are very, very significant infrastructural requirements there that would simply not be able to be afforded by the university. For example, accessibility, there is no lift, etc. So even to use it for any kind of purpose would require a very, very substantial sum of money that would need to be generated. And at the moment, the university doesn't have that resource and doesn't have a purpose for the building, given that we are now based predominantly here in Old Aberdeen and at Forester Hill. So it is continuing to be actively discussed, but in the meantime, I have a responsibility, along with the Director of Estates, to ensure that the building is sound and secure, and obviously there are concerns around things like fire safety, etc.
Mark.
Thank you. I just got a couple of linked questions on the issue of league tables, and also thank you for the really interesting presentation. With the complete university rankings, we could account for that sort of 10 place shift in terms of methodology. That Guardian leap to 13 is also a shift of about 10 places. Are you equally able to account for that movement? And is it a sustainable one, or is it a methodological one as well? And linked to your point about the world rankings, where we've retained our sort of position within the UK, what is the university doing at a national level to shout loudly enough to point to the national inadequacies that are meaning that we're falling down to the world's university rankings in universities in the UK? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the technicalities of the Guardian league table, I don't believe there's been a major shift in methodology in the Guardian that would account for that. I do believe that is a genuine improvement in performance, particularly in relation to this National Student Survey, which forms a significant proportion of that ranking. But we have also improved in a number of other measures in recent years, including employability. We've got further to go on that. Is it sustainable? One would hope so, but the National Student Survey is conducted every year, and there are methodological changes to that survey that have been introduced by the Office for Students in England, probably against the wishes of the sector, to be honest. So, for example, they have removed the question of overall satisfaction, which was one that was used in The Guardian as, worth 10%. So that question will no longer be available to be used. So the league table methodology will change, as well as the results. So this is what happens every year. Things change, and that's why one has to keep an eye on these matters, but not sell one's soul to it. It doesn't drive everything. In terms of the World League tables, there are things we can do, which we are seeking to do. We had a really good presentation at Senate in this chamber just recently about how academics can make their research more available, which means it's more likely to be cited. for example, open access allows, the more open access something is, the more likely it is to be cited. The more international co-authorship we have, the more likely it is to be cited. Now, we don't want to chase citations for the sake of it, and there's a whole debate about responsible use of metrics, and we have a new policy on the responsible use of metrics as well. But nevertheless, there is probably no academic that doesn't want their work to be read and referred to and built upon. So we are trying to educate our academic community as well and provide the support and tools through the library services to allow them to increase the visibility of their research. So that may well help us in the long term, because they measure citations over a 5-year period, to try to actually move our citations in a positive direction. And to be honest, we have to recognize that I went on a study tour to Australia a few years ago. They absolutely ruthlessly drive these metrics. And that's what we're up against. So yes, there are certain things we need to do as a university, as a community, and be aware of what feeds into these and try and improve them. Things like student-staff ratios form a pretty major part of the QS ranking as well. But actually, as well, we need to lobby, as we do, as George does, as he does in terms of the funding group at University of Scotland and so on, for a greater investment in research. And if we could get the Northern Ireland Protocol agreed in the next few days, maybe that might free up the horizon, the European funding, that we could re-enter the European funding landscape, which has so many benefits, both for the visibility of our science, the funding of our science, its prestige, and they want us in there as well because they know that British science is really good. So there are some major things that we do need to lobby governments about in relation to science funding. And to be fair, under this Prime Minister, we have seen some indications that they have not cut the science budget despite the difficulties, and they've actually set up a new ministry in UK government, as you may have seen, around science. So that augurs well for that longer-term investment and ensuring that science investment comes to a level that matches our competitors in relation to proportion of GDP.
It's a really helpful answer, thank you.
I'm quite keen to move on, but a question from Nigel.
Thank you, and probably a brief one. Without being too parochial about it, could Carl say something about the university's rankings within the Scottish framework?
Yeah, so when I came to Aberdeen, and also when I was at Dundee in my previous university, I decided not, when I wrote out to the university, not to write about the Scottish ranking. And that was deliberate because I felt that there aren't very many universities in Scotland, and I think it's slightly invidious, really, to make those comparisons. If I wanted to, though, in direct response to your question, I would say that St Andrews has played the rankings game very effectively. What they have managed to do is have, they come top in the National Student Survey every year by 2 or 3%. It's just extraordinary. And I beat them once in Dundee as Vice Principal Education, I think in my second year there, when we came in the top 10 and they slipped one year. But ever since then, they've been top in Scotland and top in the UK pretty much. And that means that they are ranked at the very highest level. Now, I don't think anybody would claim that St Andrews has the strongest research in Scotland. Clearly, you would look to Edinburgh and Glasgow in terms of research power. And they have, all three of those universities have much stronger results in the reputation surveys that form a major part and a very controversial part of the world rankings. So we can't compete in some of those world rankings. However, if you look, St Andrews have disappeared from the top 200 in the QS as well. They were in the top 100 when I arrived in Scotland 10 years ago. So, there are different rankings that, they will look at the UK league tables and claim that, they managed to top the Times and Sunday Times a couple of years back, knocked Oxford and Cambridge off the top. So it's a mixed bag. Edinburgh's student experience is known to be you know, not amongst the strongest in the sector, if I put it politely. And therefore they don't do well in the Guardian ranking, for example. So it's complicated. I think there are different things, but we need to be amongst that top 4 ancient universities and competing. And we, as I say, we are above St Andrews in some of the world rankings, below them in UK rankings and so forth. Okay. But we need to be we're trying to be in the top 25 consistently across all of those rankings. And if we can be in the top 20, you know, that feels like where Aberdeen should be, but probably hasn't seen itself as being able to be for quite a number of years.
Okay, in conclusion on this item, can I just draw on something that one of the 2 Chinese members of the business committee stressed a couple of meetings ago. She underlined the importance of the university's ranking in the world rankings as a way of marketing the university to overseas students who are, as the financial presentation that Mark White, the new Director of Finance, gave us at our last meeting, crucial to the financial success of the university. So more power to your elbow, particularly on the world stage. Thank you very much, Carl. That was stimulating, as you've seen, in a number of ways, and thank you very much for covering such a wide horizon in short order. The next item is my report, and I wrote it down so that I didn't need to take up time speaking it. You'll see that it covers Marshall, and you can be sure that the Business Committee will keep its talons into the Marshall issue. He may not know it, but Pete Edwards is on our hit list for our next meeting, or perhaps the one after that, if he claims that there are diary difficulties. So we'll keep our talons into that. I'm very happy to answer any questions that people have on my report. I'll not be disappointed if there are none, but I have one thing to add. Nicole Cochrane has been effectively our secretary, although Tracy has that title, but Clark. It's Nicole that's the power behind Tracy's throne for the last 5 years, and greater things have been thrust upon Nicole with the result that she's stepping back from that role. And I just wanted to give her a bunch of flowers as a thank you for keeping me in good order for the last 4 or so years when I've been the convener, and no doubt Nigel, who's in the floor, would drink to that. So if
absolutely.
Yes, if you would like to come up, Tracy, I'll not move away from my mic, but if you'd like to come to the front, Tracy, and
Nicole.
Oh, sorry, Nicole. Yes, thank you. And another thing that Nicole does really well, as you have no doubt observed, is she curates the members of the General Council and the Business Committee beautifully. People have a great relationship with Nicole, and many thanks, or Tracy, or whatever your name is. Sorry about that. And we're very grateful indeed, and grateful too that you won't be entirely disappearing into the shadows, but will continue as part of our important link with alumni relations. And a welcome too to Elise, who's stepped into Nicole's shoes as the effective secretary to the business committee. Now, talking of which, the next item is Nicole, or Tracy, Tracy Slavin, the Chief Operating Officer for the university, to talk about, in her capacity as formal clerk to the General Council, the question of business committee elections.
Thank you, and I answer to most names as well.
My father-in-law used to call me Gordon for a reason that I did wonder about.
Thank you. So just moving back to the formalities, as required by Standing Order number 19, notice is hereby given that the current terms of appointment of 6 members of the Business Committee will end on the 30th of September 2023. The following individuals are due to retire from the Business Committee on that date, but are eligible for re-election. Those individuals are Susan Strachan, Jan McRobbie, Lisa Henderson, Eric Crockhart, and Judith Taylor. The following individual is due to retire from the Business Committee on that date, but is not eligible for re-election. That individual is Ewan Mackenzie. Nominations for positions on the committee will close on Friday the 14th of April at 12 noon. If more nominations are received than there are vacancies, then the election will be held and the council notified accordingly. Nomination forms can be collected today or by contacting Elise in the Alumni Relations team. Please use the email address which is posted in the meeting chat, or is about to be, to request a nomination form if you are online. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tracy. There are also 2 vacancies at the moment on the Business Committee. So there are 8 seats up for nomination. So I would warmly encourage people to put their hats in the ring. Don't be shy. We're very keen to welcome all sorts of graduates and members of staff who are also members of the academic staff, who are also members of the General Council, to join the Business Committee. As you can imagine from the way that that this meeting is run, we operate in a very informal way, and I'm hugely grateful to members of the Business Committee, particularly my vice convener Jenny Mordew, for their warm, their energetic participation in the work of the Business Committee. We feel that we do make an impact. We come from all the Airts, geographically and in terms of background, and I would encourage those who are in or around Aberdeen, and also those in the wider world, to put their hats in the ring. We have 2 members who are domiciled in China at the moment, and we have 1 member who's domiciled in the States at the moment. As you can imagine, fixing a time of the meeting which suits these time zones is a challenge, but they contribute very helpfully indeed. So I would strongly encourage those present in person and those online to put their hats in the ring. It doesn't take a lot of time out of a busy life, and I find it, as must be evident, good fun. Now, our second presenter is Graham Payton, the head of the School of Biological Sciences, who is going to talk to us about the Science Teaching Hub. This presentation was really prompted by a question from the floor, or a suggestion from the floor at the last General Council meeting, for which the Business Committee was grateful. Graham, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to deliver this overview, because for years I've been talking about the plans and the project and the teamwork. So actually seeing the completion is a great step forward. I won't be able to give you a tour today, but the Secretariat have arranged a set of dates which we can do during term time, and that will give you the chance to see the actual activity and action that underpins this project. I've also recorded this already online, and it's got captioning as well in case I speak too fast or can't be followed, or you want to re-watch it and share it with other people. So that will be available currently. Well, let me start with laboratory teaching. As a scientist, it's a key part of our education. And whenever we develop courses, we develop learning outcomes, objectives of our education. And for science, there's always part of that that's about laboratory teaching, about picking up skills and techniques. And as the university evolved, each individual component part, each department, developed their own physical spaces, bespoke towards their particular needs. But supporting laboratories, resourcing laboratories needs an incredible amount of resource, but it also needs incredibly accomplished staff as well. And often, we had areas in the university that were better equipped than others. But when people ask me today, Graham, after lockdown, we don't need laboratories. We performed laboratory work virtually. We developed techniques virtually. I still look at students today that missed out on the opportunity for skill-based learning, how to use a pipette, how to carry out a titration, how to actually physically use an instrument. Because skill-based learning remains at the heart of science. Well, George Washington Wilson, about 1886, I found this picture, and what it shows is a laboratory recently modified at Marshall College. And actually, if George Washington Wilson was to come to the Science Teaching Hub, he'd identify many similarities. We've got taps and sinks, we've got gas taps, we've got reagents sitting on the bench for chemistry, and what we have is a mode of interface, a blackboard, between the teacher and the students. The difference today is, of course, we expect much better lighting. We underpin everything with health and safety. We all get back home safely each day. And we have also much more light and a much better ambient environment. So what we need to think about was how do laboratories change with times? So we needed to audit across the whole university in the science subjects how techniques have developed and how laboratory space has been adapted to that challenge. But we also need to think about the student journey. And in a recent visit, I met up with the Lord Provost, whose granddaughter is using the Science Teaching Hub, and she said to me, Graham, it's great feeling like a scientist. And that, for me, was the most important aspect of what we've accomplished. We've actually made science students feel like scientists and empower them. But also importantly, and Carl discussed the underpinning driver of employability, we want our students to graduate not just with the understanding and techniques, but with the skills that employers' employability demand. We want students to use state-of-the-art instrumentation, be exposed to real challenges in the facilities we offer. And again, we're trying to find this harmony between education, teaching skills, realizing expectations, and also advancing our research. So it's important that many of the core subjects we teach are actually research-led. Our estate was getting jaded. This is the Meston building. This is first-year chemistry. I'm sure some of you who may have studied here a few years ago, it looks remarkably familiar. And while that lab's mothballed, that's actually what it looks like today. The more advanced chemistry area as well has not gone under refurbishment for many decades. And it shows that when we're trying to recruit students and trying to champion investment into our subjects and into our education. Here's geology labs on the first floor of the Meston building. These were refurbished when geosciences relocated from Marshall up to Old Aberdeen over 25 years ago. You can see there's some digital displays above the students' heads, but all of the benches face forward and the microscopes are grouped at the edges and they're quite old-fashioned. We did a large refurbishment within life sciences and medicine about a dozen years ago. This is one of the laboratories in the basement of zoology where flexible teaching could be delivered for a range of biological and biomedical sciences. And this was one of the biochemistry and microbiology laboratories, again, in the basement of zoology, that had undergone a level of redevelopment 12 years ago. But the project, we didn't want to increase the number of laboratories. So what we wanted to do was to take about 15 laboratories and convert them into space of about 7 laboratories, but with much more efficient usage. We wanted to make more flexible space so that different classes could use the same laboratories, because when we looked at the timetabling, we had large amounts of void space and therefore weren't using effective technical staff deployment. Also, a central technical support using highly trained technicians who were multi-talented to work across all disciplines. So to unify and make staff proud to be engaged in technical teaching delivery. And again, the aspiration, state-of-the-art facilities, like industry and like employers seek, both within the city, but also nationally and internationally. But one of the great aspirations we have in our 2040 ambitions is about interdisciplinary. And by looking over our shoulder at what colleagues do in different schools, by going into space that's shared, we can begin to feel the osmotic transfer of interdisciplinarity. So the School of Medicine, Medical Sciences, the School of Biological Sciences, Geosciences, and Natural and Computing Sciences united in this vision for the Science Teaching Hub. So the vision that we had, first of all, we had wide consultation with all end users, students, demonstrators, technical staff, academic staff that were teaching, external users, outreach, people who wanted to come to the university to see how we can disseminate the excellence that we perform. We also made sure that the architect and design teams were embedded with academics so that things that could and couldn't work could be understood at the very start. And what we then did was we went around the country looking at the most recent developments, trying to see how they brought very diverse skills together, how they managed technical teams, and how they developed IT solutions to long-term problems. So the focus overall was on the physical building, the shape, the size, the ratio of lab space to shared space, the safety, how we actually made sure that people felt accessible. The IT process, the vision, is a paperless laboratory in which every user gets a device, and that links back to the virtual learning environment that's so developed during our lockdown period. We also wanted to audit all of the equipment that laboratory classes employ and make sure we could update and replace that with most modern instruments. And then above all, it was about staffing. It was about creating a technical group that offered excellence, but engaging them with the academic community as well. And this, of course, required a large amount of resource, not just money, but of intellectual time, of reworking our schedules and timetables, and of upgrading the learning environment that we offered. This is a vision, and it's interesting, this architect's impression actually looks like the building is finished today, which is really rewarding. And even inside, when we look at laboratories, this is the ground floor laboratory dominated by geosciences with digital microscopy. Look at the physical light presence flowing into the lab here. And a flat floor area at the very front that shares the amenity of both being a physiological area for bicycles and running machines, but also can be a flat floor lecture room or meeting room with up to 120 people. And that's it changed into flexibility. And then on the first floor, again, laboratories where we can see lots of brightness, the lack of clutter. And then on the top floor where we can see fume hoods, 40 of them at the back there, with flexible laboratory space in front. And again, spaces for education, spaces for reflection, spaces to share science and knowledge transfer where research can come together with education. So moving from the virtual to the actual, underpinning all this was the idea of the state-of-the-art facility, the most modern facility in the world delivering education, but a space where all schools and all student users felt welcomed and felt engaged. A focus on digital base that would truth test the future. But I think above the building, it's all about the people. The people are central to the success of this. And at the heart of that's the students. And we've been carrying out routine student surveys to monitor their use of it over the first half session and during this half session, but also the positive engagement of academic and technical staff. And then a unified technical teaching team who have oversight of safety, oversight of timetabling, and oversight of supply and cleaning the actual building, but also working with the all-important student demonstrators, postgraduate students that are so important in facilitating the undergraduate journey. But going beyond just the university's direct need, we're committed to effective outreach. So we have senior school pupils being welcomed to carry out their projects there. We have routine engagement with primary and secondary schools able to perform classes they can't do within their own estates. And then also, when we recruit students, being able to show STEM ambassadors the benefits of this investment is such an important step forward. The project took 94 weeks to complete. The crane at the centre of this required 13 articulated lorries to bring it from Liverpool. You'll see here the prefabricated structure was then furnished with concrete and with glass, the concrete coming from the Republic of Ireland, the glass coming all the way from Turkey. The shell was sealed up and effectively watertight before the internal process began to be constructed. You'll notice there's only 4 chimneys on top of the building. If you look at medicine or even zoology, there's dozens. 2 of these chimneys reflect energy supply. The other 2 evacuate over 60 fume hoods from the whole building. 94 weeks from start to finish. We had also done this as a fixed cost project, having agreed with the builder an exact sum in advance. But most importantly, the governance of the project was through a project board that had oversight of spend and worked at the highest level, a project management group that had end users, and from that, a range of subgroups that covered education, facilities, projected technical engagement, etc. And this is the most modern facility of its kind anywhere. In addition to this investment in the building and the people, we allocated almost £2 million to investment of state-of-the-art scientific equipment to furnish the building, and a further 1.85 million towards IT and AV fitting of our aspirations and the educational drivers within the institution. All this took place despite the impact of COVID. We had periods in which no building work could take place because the country was at complete lockdown, and we had to secure the site, and all the staff working on it had to leave. Even once the most restrictive period was over, there was still a requirement for physical distancing and a limitation to 32 people actually working on the site at any one time. And this did have a direct increased cost burden on the project, but it's testimony to the management of the institution, but also the resilience of the project that we managed to get finishing reasonably just after the ambitious project deadline. And I think it really is about the confidence of senior management at the university and their ability to work with external parties that's testimony to the success of the Science Teaching Hub as a physical structure. So what's it actually like inside? Well, here, this is the ground floor in one of the labs that's also available for outreach. It allows 40 students to have relatively low-level technological labs. We can see here a pile of devices. These are the ones that are charged in central carts. So a student comes in, uses a locker to take their personal belongings away from them, takes a lab coat out and safety specs, washes their hands, and then enter the laboratories. This is a third-year class in physiology, using pipettes, burettes, doing biochemical work. And you can see not just the benches being deep, but it allows a large amount of flexibility and movement around that facility. Furthermore, in addition to the individual devices, the students can also use the monitors in this paperless laboratory. Also on the ground floor, we have a lab that's currently dedicated for geosciences teaching. These are digital geological microscopes, so they're polarizing light microscopes. This is the biggest group of them anywhere in the world. We have 120 of them. And again, this allows students to come in and be able to interface between their devices and the actual microscopes, and again, linking towards the monitors for that enhanced learning environment. Here we are in the biggest laboratory within the building on the first floor. This accommodates 180 students. That doesn't mean that every class has to have 180 people, because for each of the laboratories, we can allow up to 3 different classes to take place simultaneously. Students wear an earpiece, and the education provider is able to group that specific lump of students. Not just 1/3, but we could have one large class at 100 and a small class at 20. We can reconfigure to match the timetable, which means we can make continuous use of these laboratories throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. You can see here one single class, but you'll notice, for example, there's individuals in green, and they're both lecturers and demonstrators. And that means as a head of school, I can walk in to a laboratory class and make sure the teaching is efficient and they're not just hanging about with each other. In the old days, when everyone wore white lab coats, I couldn't differentiate the teaching staff from the students. So this allows a much better management efficiency. Back in this big lab again, and we can see here a class where there's 3 different classes taking place. You can notice the student looking at the monitor has an earpiece on, just on one ear. This means that any health and safety alarms, be it fire or a gas detector, the students can hear that, but they can interface directly with the academic staff delivering. And actually, if you notice the monitors down the wall on the far side, there's different screens there represent the different groups of students within that actual class. That's been transformative. It's efficient use of space, and it's really effective deployment of the technical team. This lab is on the other side, again, on the first floor, and here another biochemical experiment. And again, we can see the students moving into them. And this is the start of a class because we can see up on the screens individual QR codes. The students use the QR codes, log into the system, and that enables us to take a register without going through the traditional way of looking through individual student name to faces. Again, we can see here in the same class different use of the space, but again, students working effectively within the designated bench areas. This lab is configured by having a peninsula bench with up to 8 students on the right-hand side, and then an island bench that people can walk around. In the 70s and 80s, we designed benches that crossed the whole of a class, and it restricted any movement. And it also meant if you were caught in the center of a bench, your ability to interact with demonstrators or teacher was reduced. So when we redeveloped laboratories in the 2000s, we went for individual islands, but they're not effective use of space. So we found this group of peninsula and islands to be the best between, having a good number of students per class, but also having that crucial interaction. Up in the top floor now, in which we have the highest facilitated classes. This room here has 40 fume hoods, and unlike older chemical labs with fume hoods around the edge of the classes, we have between the fume hoods open bench space, so a student can simultaneously be doing experiments requiring fume hood use or apparatus, and also non-fume hood use. So much, much more effective use of the work environment. And again, here we can see that link taking place and the students being exposed to these processes. Within this lab as well, there's actually a portable nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, which is something that is very rarely available within undergraduate teaching, but it's something, again, we felt was committed towards our ambitions for research-led teaching. And here we've got a class looking at irrigation water. I know because it's one of my classes here. And again, we can see how we've got the effective use of new techniques being adopted by a wide range of master's students. And then finally, in this laboratory class on the east side of the second floor, you can see these rather unusual appendages coming down from the ceiling. And these are extraction units for analytical instrumentation, gas chromatography, nitroplasma, atomic emission spectroscopy, and numerous other state-of-the-art instruments. And again, we look at students extracting samples, preparing samples, and moving forward to actually carry out the analysis. It's safe, it's effective, it's efficient, it's highly supervised, and it's state-of-the-art. So we've been really going full throttle since September 2022. We had an initial transition of geosciences at this time last year as lockdown was being lifted, but now we're working in a full academic timetable. And we've had outstanding performance from our technical teaching team that we've unified from across all the schools. We've managed to take the whole timetabling from 15 previous labs and put them into 7 labs now with the effectiveness and smooth running. And we have also central health and safety oversight with one team for the full science teaching hub, and that information is then disseminated to individual schools. And we're getting towards a paperless laboratory, the idea of just using devices by staff and students within that process. But above all, it's had a massive positive feedback from students and a very positive feedback from staff, and that's what we'd sought to achieve all along. But in a sense, it's not just teaching. We were delighted in June when Chris Jackson, the geoscientist who's got a very long legacy in terms of broadcasting, but also social media, he agreed to open the building formally. What was wonderful was it wasn't just about students. We had a day dedicated towards outreach from schools across the city and the Shire, and they were engaged very much as part of our key process because they are our future students. And Chris gave a really inspiring talk that brought all the students together from a wide range of disciplines. And then more recently, we've had a visit from the Queen Consort, who came and visited us in January and also was able to see the outreach that we performed in terms of local schools. So we had Sunnybank School present, and they were looking at dinosaurs and at engagement. And I must say she spent probably more time with them than talking to me about the instrumentation that cost us £1.85 million. But again, the perception is it's about engagement with the community, going beyond just the educational delivery. And I think if we look at something that's key, our future students need to see now the facilities that we offer. They need to understand that we are committed to offering the highest quality education, and that the investment we've made in the Science Teaching Hub is for our current students, but it also shows a commitment towards the future generation of scientists, and that we're the place that they must come to learn that. So outreach is really at the heart of all of our STEM ambitions in recruiting the future generations of students that will occupy the Science Teaching Hub in years to come. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Absolutely super presentation. I wish I was a scientist.
It's never too late to become one. So.
Any questions from Graham, for Graham? Judith.
Thank you. Judith Taylor here. I was very fortunate to attend the formal opening of the Science Teaching Hub and was completely blown away by it, and I would encourage anyone who can go to do so. I also was impressed by the vastness of the spaces, and I thought to myself, wow, this is a huge space to either keep warm or cool down in the summer. And I just wondered what kind of weight was given to the energy efficiency thoughts during the planning stage, particularly now that energy costs have gone through the roof.
So any new building has to have BREEAM accreditation. So throughout the process, we had a partnership with Turner and Townend, who were basically working between ourselves and the builder, and that made sure that they were actually achieved. So the BREEAM accreditation that was sought has been achieved. But again, any building takes time to bed in. So what we have here is the commitment of a need for effective air extraction, which might not have been the case in the old labs, so we have to make sure things are health and safety-wise for those. We also have to parallel that against the the heating, and we also have to think about things like fume hood distractions being efficient as well. So for example, there's 8 air circulation units in the building, but there's actually only 1 equivalent of those in the whole of Meston. So I can't give you an answer to energy at the moment because we're still letting things settle down, but if I'm invited back in the future, I can report on how we are a few years down the line.
Jenny?
Try the next one along. Mine is just switched on. You turn yours off. Okay. Try the next one along. Is this a deliberate pause? Yes, I thought so.
Why not?
Turn yours off as well. Could you turn those ones off behind? Because only 2 can be on.
There we go. Technology. Graham, you would be proud of this. I had the pleasure of, well, dubious pleasure perhaps sometimes, of being the court representative on the project management board for the Science Teaching Hub. And I would just like to pay tribute to Graham. He's going to be surprised by this because we've fought like cat and dog through the whole thing. But this project really would never have got off the ground and would never have come to completion if it hadn't been for people like Graham and Richard before he departed for pastures new. The fact that it was done during the pandemic probably made it even more difficult than it was going to be in the first place. And to actually get all the departments and schools to work together and produce something that actually fulfilled everything that we set out to achieve is a great tribute, and I think Graham deserves a big round of applause. But I do also have a question.
Thank you, Jenny.
I do have a question. When we were talking about outreach and things, there was a plan at one stage to involve the local community, not just the schools and the educational outreach, because that was one of the reasons for having the flexible space on the ground floor. And I wondered how we have progressed that, if we've progressed it at all.
So we focused on schools at the moment, and I think through the Aberdeen Biodiversity Centre, we've done everything from dinosaurs through to genomics. We've actually had second-year school pupils in using a flexible sequencer and actually sequencing genes on organisms, which is so high technology, it's fantastic. But I think what we do need to do is go beyond primary, secondary schools into the wider community in the local area. So we'll make that a commitment, Jenny.
The lady on the left, whose name I can't remember. Oh, yes, thank you.
Many congratulations, Graham. As an arts graduate, for me, you've turned science fiction into science fact. And it's a wonderful addition to my alma mater. So I'm very proud of it and proud of you. And I think that the time you spent on the Union Management Committee has obviously stood you in good stead.
Alison, it was the Students' Representative Council, but yes, we'll see. We'll see. It teaches you organisation skills and community. And I think when you look at the project, it was bringing different opinions to the table and always finding compromise. Because if you force people to do things, it never happens. And I think when you've got strong-minded people, they're the people most effective at making decisions. But you need to make sure we all pull in the same way. And it is a great testament to that success. So, Alison, thank you very much.
Elise?
We have a question online. Ogana says, amazing facility. Wish we had those in my time. But what are the old labs being used for? Are they repurposed or basically abandoned?
So that's a good question. So one of the things that we've done is Carl's taken over the chairing of a space management group. And what we're trying to do is find the most effective use for the voids it's developed. So the chances are that some spaces will become large computer labs. And then what we're also doing at the moment is for one of the large voids, we've got a government agency we're currently negotiating with to access that for a period of time, which will enhance stakeholder engagement and collaboration. So we should see the space as being transitionary, and we'll make sure that's used effectively throughout the process.
Shall we move on? But a third round of applause to Graham, I think, wouldn't go amiss. Elise.
So we had one more question online from Eric saying re-meetings of the General Council standing order says the General Council shall assemble twice per year. They do not specify academic or calendar year. Now that we have stopped coordinating the winter GC meeting with the university AGM, should we reconsider reverting to the old system where we held the GC meetings every 6 months, i.e. in December and May? I mention this because standing orders also say notice of any intended change should be submitted for approval by the GC at the statutory meeting before that at which it is intended to come into effect.
Yes, that's really relevant to the final item on the agenda, which we might as well deal with just now if people are happy with that, which is the notice of the next meeting. As Eric has said, we've for a variety of reasons we've lost the regularity that General Council meetings had. We've also had slight diary difficulties in arranging the next General Council meeting. The current proposal is that it be held on the 24th of August, which is a Thursday, at 5 p.m. UK time, which is would be an experiment to see whether that attracts a larger number of people, both in person and online, than the traditional Saturday morning meeting does and has done in the past. It wasn't intended for that. It's a reaction to diary difficulties in getting the right people and facilities, but that would restore the 6-monthly interval, which has been sadly interrupted by mostly by the pandemic. It doesn't return to the traditional time of year, which, as Eric has said, was December and May, and I think on that we might debate in the business committee what the best way forward is. But if there are thoughts today about that emerging conclusion that the 24th of August be our at 5 p.m. on a Thursday be our next meeting, I would be happy to listen to them either now or a whisper in the ear over coffee. Okay. Now, it's almost past, and we've got, moving back to item 7, any other business, we've got 2 questions notified in advance. One of the questioners is present and the other isn't. There may be other questions from the ether or from the floor to answer. That seems to me to suggest that if people are happy to keep going for a quarter of an hour beyond the intended finish time, that we could dispose properly of these questions. Are people happy with that? Okay, the first of the pre-notified questions comes from Ewan Cameron, who's present and who is a management committee member of the North East Scotland Biodiversity Partnership. Ewan.
Thank you. I'm a zoology graduate from 1975, which is an unbelievably long time ago. I worked as a professional ecologist for more than 40 years, and most of my voluntary time in retirement goes towards biodiversity work. At the end of last year, I read about an online seminar the university was running on the international biodiversity crisis, and it got me wondering about what does the university actually do on its own estate to help address the biodiversity crisis?
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's fair to say that we have not done as much as we would like to do in the past. But we now, as I mentioned earlier on in my talk and in response to questions, we do have now a team of people who are focused on our environmental sustainability. And within that, and we talked briefly beforehand, we have now got somebody on our staff who is an expert in biodiversity. And that will, I think, help us to start to really look systematically at this across our campuses. The first of our climate assemblies will be on biodiversity on campus. And we recognize that it's likely to be people like yourself, people in our community who care deeply about this, who will come up with really good ideas. We've also applied to have an intern who will map all of the spaces across our campuses, because we don't have that. So we need to put some basic building blocks in place, understand what spaces we have, and then start to put in place some changes. And some of those will raise eyebrows. So for example, you probably know about you shouldn't mow your lawn in May. We have lots of nice lawns out there. Are we going to have no mowing in May? What would we think about that? So I think you're right, there's a lot to do. We recognize that. We have now got a plan for this area, and we're going to have a big, wide-ranging debate in the Climate Assembly to take this work forward, and we've got somebody who will lead that work for us. So exciting times, but lots to do as well in this space.
It's interesting that, do you want to come back on that, Ewan?
Yes, the main thing I would like to say is, I mean, it's great to hear that, and certainly the presentation you made earlier on was extremely encouraging. What I would like to do is to offer the very substantial and extensive local expertise that exists within not only the Biodiversity Partnership itself, but the wider networks of the individuals involved. The Biodiversity Partnership's been on the go for just over 50 years. It has an excellent record of delivery. One of the things we try and avoid is too much talking and a bit more doing. But we would like to offer that expertise to the university. A fundamental part of our ethos is collaboration, and it's very much the point that Graham was making in his presentation about taking all the people who can contribute to something like that and having them involved. It's a potential major contribution to league tables, I would like to suggest. And the other thing is that with the right knowledge and expertise, a lot of these biodiversity measures can actually save money on things like land maintenance and so on, but without turning the campus into a jungle.
So that's a very welcome offer to work with us. Very much want to involve you in that work. That's fantastic. I should have mentioned, of course, as well, the Cruikshank Botanic Garden, which is one of the jewels in the crown of the university, of course, and a lot of work does go on there already to support biodiversity, and we have some further plans in that area as well that we're working on with School of Biological Sciences as well. So yes, let's work together on this. I think there are some great opportunities for us to do that, and it's dear to my heart, and it's dear to the university's heart, and we do already work together very effectively with a number of community groups in the Northeast. We do beach cleans together. We've got the Northeast Climate Action Group that I've been along to a number of their very, very interesting meetings in the evenings. And the pandemic allowed us to join very easily online and so forth. So I've learned a lot through those sorts of interactions as well. So yes, great. Let's work in partnership on this.
Well, thanks very much for raising the question, Ewan, and for your very kind offer. The other questioner is not, I think, here. May be online. No. He comments on the rise of woke agenda in all aspects of the university, as well as the university getting involved in political matters, China, Brexit, Ukraine, LGBTQ, etc., etc. And his cri de coeur is stick to traditional matters and keep social engineering out of it. Now, I think if Bishop Elphinstone were here, he, a politician, very active in trying to avoid the war with England that ended up in Flodden, a cleric, perhaps very much engaged in social justice issues, and with that a quotable quote that the university uses so much nowadays, open to all in the pursuit of excellence. I think probably Bishop Elphinstone, were he sitting in my seat, would would be a little bit ill at ease with the tenor of the question. But there is perhaps a point about the woke agenda, which has attracted press notice recently. For example, students being warned about violence in Peter Pan and perhaps also Macbeth and other literary studies, which to people of my generation, one finds that a little unusual, granted that English literature and indeed French literature challenges the orthodoxy. Could you add anything to that, Carl?
Yes, very happy to talk about this. So, first of all, I don't think we as a university offer any apologies for our commitment to inclusive. It's one of the 4 pillars of Aberdeen 2040, inclusive, interdisciplinary, international, sustainable. And I'm hugely proud of the work that we do to be inclusive for all members of our community. And I'll just give you one example of a piece of work that some people might regard as woke or use that term woke. And that's our launch of our anti-racist strategy. We have committed, our university court has approved a strategy for us to become an anti-racist university. Why have we done that? We've done that because across the whole of the UK, the Equality and Human Rights Commission wrote a very penetrating report which indicated that racism was something that all universities needed to address. And you only need to look at the conversations we've had in our community through the work we've done around anti-racism to recognize, for example, in our medical school, the feedback that we got from our students about the way they felt, both the way they were treated and the kinds of issues and the way healthcare was being educated. And that was a really important piece of work for us to listen to our community on that. We have committed to that piece of work, and I think it's really important to recognize, for example, that our students from Black and minority ethnic groups get degrees which are less strong than typically the degrees that white students get. That's called the awarding gap. That needs to be understood. People coming in with the same qualifications to UK universities from those groups end up more regularly with lower degree classifications than their counterparts, all other things being equal. That feels uncomfortable to us as a community, as a university, and as a sector. So that's an example of work that often is misunderstood and mischaracterized in the media as woke and why are you doing it? We're doing it because we care about our community and the equality, diversity, and inclusion agenda that we have at the university. So I do think those are things that we are unapologetic about, our commitment to those things. I've just lost the thread of what the second... Oh, yes, Peter sorry, Peter Pan, yes. So take that example. We get, how many? I mean, dozens of freedom of information requests around these matters. I'll just put to bed your concerns about Peter Pan. It was not actually Peter Pan, okay? It was another text within an anthology which included Peter Pan, but they don't tell you that. That's not what's quoted in the Times and the Sunday Times and so forth. Every time you watch a program on television, you will frequently see that there are there's a warning. I never see anybody complaining about trigger warnings on the BBC or ITV or Sky or whatever. It's just a part of life that we provide some context for people who may find something disturbing. It might be the flashing strobe lights, or it might be somebody who may find a discussion, for example, that involves sexual violence in a program or whatever. Those things are routine and we accept in our society. However, for some reason, universities seem to be singled out as areas of society where anything where you try to respond to potential issues that students might feel around a text or a film or whatever becomes somehow highly controversial. I understand why that is, and you will find that we've published on our website a really thoughtful and I think thought-provoking piece by a member of our staff in the School of English, in our School of Language, Literature, Music and Visual Culture, but a lecturer in English, who has written about why we use trigger warnings, as they're called, or why we alert students to elements. First of all, we need to understand that this came from the request of our student body. We worked very closely with our student union on this matter, and we have, I think, contrary to some of the popular myths, we are not trying to prevent students from engaging with difficult material. That is what a education in the humanities is about. We precisely are challenging them with the most challenging things. I'm a student of humanities myself. I study English and modern languages and I'm a professor of German. Of course, there are things in text that are deeply problematic, that make you think, going back historically. We, I think, are very concerned to ensure that what we are doing in this space is properly understood, and that's why I would suggest that we circulate to this meeting the piece of work that Tim put together in order to explain the research on this, why we do it. Clearly, there are probably ways in which we respond to freedom of information requests as well that allow a mischaracterization of what we're actually doing, because I do think it is in the best interest of students. We have worked hard, and they are highly supportive, as you will see in the quotations that they provide within that article. They are highly supportive of the work we do in partnership with them to ensure that they are both challenged, but there are people who have a lived experience, which means that they do feel that it's appropriate for them to have some opportunity for that to be contextualized before they come across a piece of work. And I think that is important. And when you see what's going on in wider society, some of the speculation about a very tragic case at the moment, it is difficult. Some of these things are very difficult for individuals. Some people are highly vulnerable. We have highly vulnerable people in our community. We owe them a duty of care as well. So I would just ask, when you see those headlines, just to take the chance to read Tim's article and understand that this is quite a sensitive and complex area, which it's worth doing a little bit of thinking about rather than jumping to conclusions about what we're trying to achieve through those processes.
An excellent response, thank you very much. Are there other questions, observations, suggestions for areas of work that the Business Committee and the General Council should take up? Okay, well, we've not quite used up my promised quarter of an hour. I'm grateful to you for your forbearance. There's teas and coffees available for those who are here, and I would like to thank you all for coming along, especially, as I said at the beginning, the staff of the university, Graham, Tracy, Carl, Alice, Nicole, and others who haven't spoken, for coming along and supporting, and Kevin in the sound on the sound desk, and your colleague. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming along. A very interesting meeting. I think more interesting, including the last point that you responded to, Carl, than the average General Council meeting. Thank you very much indeed.